Hey everyone, it is week 2 of the Bible reading plan. Hopefully you are all caught up and you're still tracking with us. This week we're going to be looking at Genesis 12 through 31 and then Psalm 3 through the beginning of Psalm 7. As we get into Genesis, let me give you a couple notes on just some things to be thinking about. First, as we get into it, if you remember last week, we kind of used the phrase, God's creation ruined by sinful people. That's kind of what we saw from Genesis 1 through 11, and we ended with the question, will God intervene? Is he going to do anything to fix this worldwide broken creation? Well, in Genesis 12, we begin to see what I would say is the seed of worldwide redemption. Okay, the seed of worldwide redemption. I think that should be the phrase that we have in mind as we are looking through this passage this week. Well, I say seed because what we're going to see in God working through Abraham is the seedlings, like the beginning of something that is going to grow over time and blossom into what we know as redemption in Jesus. And so we're going to see the beginnings of the promises that are fulfilled in Jesus. So the seed of worldwide redemption, that's what we're going to get to see in these passages. Two quick things on them. Number one, as you look through Genesis, note the character of God as he interacts with Abraham. Here's what I mean by that. For instance, look at Genesis 13. As you read through that passage, it's right after God makes himself known to Abraham. Abraham does something really cowardly and wicked. It's not good. You can read it for yourself. But as he does that, it would be easy, I think, for us to sometimes think, okay, well, Abraham's done, right? Like he's sinned too much. This is a bad guy. And so God would just cast him aside, but he doesn't. God intervenes. He doesn't condone what Abraham's doing, but he's patient and he's gracious with Abraham. He's a new follower of God, and so it takes time. And so as you read through that and you note the character of God as patient and gracious, would you maybe, if that needs to preach to yourself, would you let that happen? Like if you feel like you've sinned too far or you've done too much or you're not following God like you would want to, note that God is gracious and patient. But also for the church, would we, as we think about new Christians who just come into the family, let's not expect them to have everything together, or when people sin or fall short, would we have an air of grace and patience? Because that seems to be the character of God. And so as his church and his followers, we too should just note that God is gracious to people who are learning how to follow him. So maybe that's for you, maybe that's for how you engage with other people, but just notice how God interacts with Abraham throughout this story. And too, as we see him interact with Isaac and then the beginning of Jacob in this week, that's just the character of God. The other thing to note about this passage, what's really, really, really important is the promises or the covenant that God makes with Abraham. That's going to be found in Genesis 12, 15, and then 17. We'll notice these promises or this covenant that God makes with Abraham. And that's going to be important because really the rest of Scripture is that promise, this seed, being fulfilled. And so even in the New Testament, in the Gospel of Matthew, we see that Jesus is the fulfillment of this promise to Abraham. In Galatians, Paul is still talking about the promise made to Abraham and what that means for the church today. And so for us, if we're going to understand worldwide redemption, we've got to understand the first promise that God makes. So I would encourage you, as you get to those chapters, don't skip them. Don't skim them. Maybe even take a little bit more time to journal through them and just notice what is the promise that God's making here. And then just have an eye toward how is this fulfilled in Jesus? Because we know that later on it will be. So start to get some of those thoughts circling in your head. And then as we read through the rest of Scripture, that should become more clear. So as you read through Genesis, note the character of God and also note the promise that he makes to Abraham. And then as you get to see God work through Abraham's son Isaac and then his son Jacob, just note how God seems to use unlikely people and he's gracious toward them, and he is going to work through this family line until we eventually get to Jesus. So that's the passage in Genesis. It's going to be really, really good. A quick note on the Psalms. These early psalms are psalms of lament or suffering. A lot of these are psalmists who are crying out to God in the midst of pain. And so if that's you, I just want to say, take time this week to meditate on these, journal on them, and even as you're reading them, pray these words to God. Let yourself really feel the psalmist if that's you. If you even need to, maybe one of them really hits you, maybe memorize it or really, really focus on it. Also, if you want more on these Psalms, Providence actually preached through these Psalms over the last couple years, and so go to the website, the app, check that out if you want more help on that. But these Psalms are going to be really impactful and really good, and so take time, meditate on it, journal on them, and pray through them. So that's it for this week. Hopefully you stay on track and you can do it. It's going to be exciting, and I pray that this is fruitful for you.